cinema is arguably the most malleable and versatile art form. It can depict realism, it can depict fantasy, it can depict grand stories or personal ones. It can tell stories literally or expressionistically. It can be passive, it can be interactive, and anything in between. Cinema is also capable of creating magic on the screen with very little. And it is within this particular arena, simplicity, where we are going to have our discussion today. Anytime we sit down to watch a film, we are making a choice, consciously or subconsciously, to experience the art in a particular way. Are we open to whatever the film has to throw at us, or are we expecting a specific kind of experience? Do we want pure escapism? Do we want a literal story? Do we want character drama? How we choose to approach the art form can have a great impact and make a big difference on how it affects us. I try to remain open to the film and whatever message it's trying to get across, so that I can accept it on its own terms as much as possible. The reception of art is subjective, but the meaning often is not. In simple cinema, the filmmaker often establishes a particularly magical affect with the viewer. One that doesn't need special effects or grand narratives in order to touch the most raw human parts of us. Relatability plays a role in this, but so does appreciation for the mundane. A redefining or reframing of something innocuous. The films of Ozu, holding shots for as long as possible, in wide spaces, depicting everyday people going about mundane daily activities. And yet that framing encompasses not just the people themselves, but the worlds in which they exist. Most films are concerned with more, getting right into the viewer's faces than allowing the words the characters inhabit to breathe and feel fully real. In the 1950s, it was no different. At the time of Ozu, most movies that were talked about had big, booming musical scores, overacting leads, larger-than-life stakes, and visions that almost always exceeded the budgets and technical capabilities of the time. As such, ironically, most of the films that Ozu was passed over for have since aged much more horribly than his movies have. Ozu was always more concerned with telling human stories in a way that established the words of the characters as believably as possible than he was with telling immediately gratifying epics. This is referred to now as transcendent cinema, but to Ozu, it was simply the best way to invest the audience in the realism of the story and characters. The slow burn of his movies forces the audience members to lean into them rather than the other way about. If there's anything more ubiquitous in Ozu's cinema that can be learned, is that the mundane can itself be worthwhile and artful, as it is within the mundane that we find ourselves to be the least guarded, the most human, and the most vulnerable. We see real human beings, often far away in the wide tatami shots, so named thanks to Ozu's tendency to shoot his actors from the tatami floors, process across generational gaps feeling of pride, disappointment, sorrow, ambition, loss, regret, responsibility, and love. And it is truly fascinating that just how realistic it all feels for films made so long ago, especially when one compares these films to those of their American contemporaries in Hollywood at the time, full of obvious signposting and over-dramatic acting, musical cues, and the like. The films of Abbas Kiarostami also take a simplistic approach to depicting the human experience. But the underlying themes are often far more complex than what the surface-level understanding of what we're watching first might insinuate. Iranian cinema in particular is, in my view, an often far too overlooked and underappreciated wing of world cinema. The work of Kiarostami in particular, and his colleague, Mohsen Makhmalbaf, give a significant insight into the human experience and the human psyche, and what it means to experience connections with one another inside of our human communities. These films possess any number of deep themes, like concepts of life and death, meaning and mundanity, meta self-awareness, and layered understanding of narrative. Yet aesthetically, these films often seem to be little more than a camera pointing and shooting, with the documentary aesthetic all but mastered by both Makhmalbaf and Kiarostami. But while technically straightforward, this type of cinema is some of the most effortlessly elegant and insightful of its kind. With deep tone poems about the world and humanity spangled throughout them in the form of soliloquies and monologues from both minor and major characters alike. Beautiful cinematography that shows appreciation for nature and the earth. And a signature type of meta filmmaking that makes the film aware of itself in ways that force us as viewers to think deeper about our own place in the world. Simplicity in cinema is in fact one of the more difficult feats to pull off successfully in the art form. Anyone can simply point a camera at something and begin to roll film. But very few people are able to take such a basic approach at making a film and generate the kind of depth, magic, and memorability that is needed to constitute something a classic piece of cinema. In many ways, this is why I find myself in deepest admiration for the simplest of films that still manage to completely take my breath away. Films that can work on shoestring budgets, take place in minimal locations, and focus in very short spans of time, yet somehow burn their messages and images into my mind in ways that make them completely unforgettable and sometimes even life-changing. At a time when cinema, at its most popular, is rife with constant, busy imagery that barely gives the audience a chance to breathe or really think about what they've watched. Simplicity in cinema has become an even more important commodity. When modern films can pull it off, it's exciting. And when classic films who do it well are revisited, it's always a pleasure.